Live from the Washington, D.C. area, it's the Inside Scoop. All the news that our viewers want to know. Now, here's the host.
Welcome to Inside Scoop. I'm your host this week, Mary Barthelson. August 31st marks the second anniversary of the U.S. withdrawal from Afghanistan after 20 years, following the Taliban takeover of the country. It is a difficult time for many veterans and Afghans who continue to deal with the fallout. The United Nations now estimates that around 34 million Afghans, around 85% of the population, are living below the poverty line. That's an increase of 15 million since 2020. As part of our commitment to our allies, President Biden directed the Department of Homeland Security to lead the ongoing effort to support those who worked alongside us in Afghanistan for the past 2 decades as they safely resettle in the United States. To speak more about the situation, we are joined by Manizha Azizi. Manizha and her family fled Afghanistan during the Cold War in the 1980s when she was only 5 years old. Her experience inspired her to join the effort to resettle newly arriving refugees as a volunteer with the Immigrant and Refugee Outreach Center, also known as IROC, before becoming a family service manager with Homes Not Borders. Manizha, thank you for joining us tonight. I'd like to kick off our discussion with your own story. Can you tell us where in Afghanistan your family is from?
Sure. Thank you for having me, first of all. So I guess our family is from Kabul, Afghanistan, and both my parents were born there, and as was I.
Did they move to Kabul, or
No, they were in Kabul. My grandparents had moved to Kabul. My grandmother is from the south, and my grandfather was from the north, and so they settled in Kabul, and so that's my parents. Both of my parents were born in Kabul. As far as my dad's side, yeah, they were from Kabul from the get-go. So.
And did you have a big family there?
We did, actually. We had a large family there, and my grandmother from my mother's side had many children, and we all ended up, actually no family is left there now, but it was a large family.
And what were your parents' professions? Did they go to university when they were in
my
Kabul?
father worked in import-export. He was a VP in that profession, and he had a very nice job that paid him very well. My mother worked for the bank, and so they both were working before we left.
And I know that you were very young at that time, but can you talk a little bit about what Afghanistan was like before the Cold War? I've seen a lot of photographs of women going to university in short skirts and their hair uncovered, and it looks like such a stark difference from the photographs we're used to seeing, especially under the Taliban right now, as they're restricting girls' access to education and not allowing them to work. Can you talk a little bit about what it was like?
Sure, I can touch on it. I was very little, obviously, but from what I saw and what my aunts shared with me, and my mom and my parents, was that they felt it was. They were very liberated. They were going to school without having any restrictions. They had mini skirts. I have pictures. I'm sure they don't want me to share this, but of my aunts and family members that wore the mini skirts and had the cute little short sleeve shirts and had the big hair, and just think of the 70s, and or actually previous to that in the 60s, I guess. But yeah, it was. I guess it was like that. There are pictures that I've seen, and I always think, man, if Afghanistan was kind of left at that, it would be so great. It would be a different country.
And what prompted your family to ultimately end up leaving?
So when the Soviets invaded Afghanistan, it was becoming a security issue for my brother. He was now officially a teenager. And they had already taken him into the military to go and train. And so my parents, especially my mom, didn't want my brother to, get drafted and go into become a soldier, and then, not come back. So it was something that my uncle actually, that's what prompted our family to leave initially. My dad was not for it, honestly, because he had a good job. He had his entire family there. He didn't want to go. But I think my mom, said, "Hey, this is for the betterment of our family and for our, sense of security." And so we ended up leaving. But my uncle initially got a student visa to come over and was at a university in the States. And then he started to get some of our, some of his brothers and sisters out, and that's how we were able to get processed that way.
So when you mentioned that your brother was drafted, I know that you guys left in the mid-'80s, and the president was overthrown in, I think, 1978. So that must have been the Leninist or communist client state of the Soviet Union at the time that he was drafted into.
Correct. I remember, the Russian tanks coming and kind of parking in front of, our home and other homes, and that's a very vivid picture I still have, and I can look back and think, and I remember my brother going and playing with the Russian soldiers because he was like 15, 16. Their soldiers were about 17. They're very, they're kids, and so they would all kind of play together, I guess, and hang out and things like that. But it was still very traumatic for the families because at that time there were a lot of communist parties that were kind of pro-communist that were springing about. A lot of people were ending up in jail or disappearing or being shot to death. Everybody was scared. There was a lot of checkpoints. I remember being in the car and just hiding behind my dad and my mom in the car in the back seat because there were so many checkpoints and we didn't know what to expect next.
And just to provide a little bit of historical context, I think that the Soviet bombings of civilians ultimately sparked more than 4 million Afghans to flee to surrounding countries in the first 3 years. And then by the time they withdrew a decade later, between 500,000 and 2 million Afghans were killed. So potentially more than 1 in 10 Afghans were killed. And I think most of those bombings were in the countryside. And I guess you were in the capital.
Correct.
In the city.
Correct.
So you might have escaped some of those because of your location. But when you left, you didn't come to the United States first. So how did you get out? When did you get out, and where did you go?
So we had to get out. My dad had to pay some smugglers to get us out through, we had to, I guess, disguise as villagers and get out because if they knew we were from Kabul, then divert us. But we had to basically get out and go over the border to Pakistan. And so we lived in Pakistan for about a year and a half or so before we were able to come to the U.S. We had to wait there for processing and getting our, immigration status approved.
So who came with you? Was it your parents and your siblings, or your broader family, or were you split up at that time, or were you able to go together?
We were somewhat split up. My oldest brother actually had gone earlier because he was older, and the same fear was there because he was older. He was going to get pulled into the military somehow. So he was officially adopted by my grandmother, and he came in 1980. We came, I guess, without him, and it was my mom and my dad, and my brother and my sister.
So when you came to the U.S., where did you live when you got here?
We flew into New York, and we had to stop. I remember that. It was raining really hard. We had to stop there, and then we flew into Nashville. So we lived in Tennessee for about a year and a half or so.
Is that ultimately where your family ended up settling, or did you move?
Yes, that's where the reason we ended up there is because we had U.S. ties there, and my family was there. My grandparents were there. My uncle that had gone to the university and earned his college degree here was there. My aunts were there, so that's how we ended up in Tennessee.
So you all essentially reunited in Tennessee, and you
Correct.
Stayed there?
Correct.
What was growing up like? And I guess at that time, was there an established community of Afghans?
Not really. So that was the struggle. We had family, but everybody was so busy trying to integrate, and it was tough. You know, there were some local churches that I remember them helping me. I don't recall a resettlement agency or a caseworker, but then again, I was really small. But from you know, I would remember if my mom had told me something like that. But it was very hard. You know, there was no sense of community besides family. Not knowing the language, when we came here, we did not know any English. My parents did not know any English, so it was really hard to, you know, learn and start from scratch. Very tough.
I was trying to look back at the history of Afghans immigrating to the U.S., and it seemed like there was only a trickle of a couple hundred before the 1980s, but then we got between 45 and 75,000 all arriving together, but everyone was new. So I imagine, as you mentioned, they wouldn't have a community established, and you were all going through this at the same time, trying to learn the language. And so there wasn't a resettlement group, but did you get support from like county services? What was your support system, and what did that look like at that time?
Support system, honestly, was you know, certain individuals that would step up, you know, that had connections. Some people in the community that were either that were Afghan and had come here before, or knew of other Afghans and wanted to help support, or some local churches, like I mentioned.
What was the biggest challenge for your family at that time?
Biggest challenge was the you know, the language proficiency, and not being able to pick up where you left off as far as jobs go. And you know, that was really hard for my father, is to, you know, not have that sense of community and not know where to go, and, you know, have the resources available for him.
And so you mentioned he was an importer and exporter. And what was the first job that he ended up getting when he arrived?
Honestly, it took a long time. He got a job as a dishwasher in a restaurant, and that was really hard for him.
Yeah, that is a huge change, to go from having your expertise in your profession to having to take a low-paying, low-wage job just to get by when you first arrive. I imagine not paying a lot of money. And I know there's others who are going through that right now, so I want to talk a little bit more about that with you after the break. Don't go anywhere. We'll be back in a couple of minutes.
Nice going, Spencer! I can't believe we broke old man Hennessy's window.
Correction, dude. You broke. I just threw the ball.
This is really bad. What are we gonna do?
We?
Go to the door, ask for the ball back. Are you serious?
It's my ball, Myrtleback.
You're so dead. I'd run away.
Yeah, to Uruguay.
Kiss your life goodbye. Sorry.
Let's go. See ya. Remember me and your well.
Nice one. Some friends you are.
Keep smiling, keep shining.
Hi. Tell him it was an accident, and we can fix the window. Come on. I'll come with you.
Loyalty. Pass it on.
You go first.
A message from the Foundation for a Better Life.
One day these rats were playing in the woods. Wanted some matches and that's no good. Listen to smoke before you give it a try. Only you. Don't play with matches. Don't play with fire. Cause there's nothing very funny about rooftop life. Nothing very nice on a homeless mind. So if a gorgeous force is what you desire, don't play with matches. Don't play with fire. Yeah.
Only you can prevent wildfires.
Fire.
Awkward. I'm the awkward silence. You try to avoid me, then there I am again.
But an awkward silence can be a great thing.
Like Kelly here is about to demonstrate.
You haven't really been yourself lately. Are you okay?
Find out how you can help a friend with their mental health at seizetheawkward.org.
We're back to the Inside Scoop. here again, your host.
Welcome back to Inside Scoop. I'm your host this week, Mary Barthelson. We are back with our guest, Manizha Azizi of Immigrant and Refugee Outreach Center and Homes Not Border. I want to talk to you a little bit more about what brought you to where you are today. The news tends to focus more on the negative stories, and depending on what outlet you watch or follow online, sometimes there's a demonization of refugees, and I think that you really represent the American dream, and we don't hear enough success stories. So you came here with very little, but now you've achieved success, you have a family of your own, and you're giving back. Can you share the story of how 5-year-old Manizha went from being a refugee to becoming the person that you are today?
Sure. So I guess, through a lot of hard work and, making sure that, you become a successful person in the U.S., and that's the dream. You want to live the dream. So I feel like we've achieved that, we meaning me and my husband and our family. And so I guess I grew up as an American, you could say, as you would, and went to school, went to college, and worked hard, and then basically when the fall of Kabul happened, it prompted me to want to help, and it brought back a lot of the emotions and the need to help others, just like when we first got here, and how hard it was for my family to integrate. And so I wanted to make sure that it eased some of that pain and burden off of the other families, of the newer families that were arriving. And so that's how I got into the Immigrant and Refugee Outreach Center.
That's really wonderful. And where did you complete your education? Did you study something that would help you in this work? Can you walk us through kind of what your formative years were like in the U.S.?
Sure. It's a very colorful background. So I actually, I have a degree in dental hygiene. So I'm a dental hygienist, went to school for that, but got into business. My husband started business, so I was, we have our own franchise, so we did that, and I was basically the HR, so I was doing that, and I had to learn on the job very quickly on how to run a business. And so that's been very successful. And then again, like I said, when the fall of Kabul happened, I started volunteering, and that's how I got into the nonprofit world.
And you were already you were in Virginia before you started your business?
So I'm from Maryland, but yeah, so I've been here since 2007.
Okay, so you've been here for quite a while. You were here through COVID, and
yes.
you joined IROC when you were around the time of Afghanistan falling, or were you involved before that?
It was actually, I started volunteering right after. I was volunteering as of August, September actually, because August was at the end of August. So in September, I was actively volunteering, seeking out organizations that needed help, and wondering what I could do. And so my husband actually gave me a call and said, hey, so there's a resettlement agency that needs some help. And it was very close to his job. And so I went and I visited them, and that's how I got started. And I was doing things out of the back of my truck.
Yeah, a lot of us who have been volunteering, we understand just like how hectic everything was. Can you talk a little bit about IROC's mission and what they do and who they are?
So IROC, it's actually, we just passed our 4-year anniversary. Started out a little bit before the fall of Kabul, and then when the surge happened, we just hit the ground running, basically. And IROC basically, uses the community as its support. We are basically, as much as our volunteers, and I guess what I'm trying to say is, if we didn't have volunteers, we wouldn't exist. IROC is, the power of it is its volunteers.
So IROC is a collection of volunteers who came together around the time, or shortly before Afghanistan fell, and you worked together to help resettle the new families coming in. So what kind of things do you help them with, and how do you go about doing that?
So just to go back a little bit,
okay, sure, yes.
The founders, you know, the founder of IROC was doing some small summer camps for some of the children, in some of the areas that we serve. And so after the surge happened, we all heard about it. They actually contacted me because I was kind of doing it on my own, and then they were like, hey, we need you on our team. And so that's how we all came about. And I remember meeting Megan and all of the other volunteer directors that day with Bita and Megan and Maheen and all of us. And it was just, we were all wanting to do the same thing, wanting to help, and we had the same focus. And that's how we started. But basically, IROC has a few programs. We have our New Neighbor program that will connect an American family to a refugee family and help them with essentials and whatever they're able to provide. And there's no financial obligation whatsoever. We also have a mom-to-mom program that is for moms, new moms, that will connect them to getting some of the essentials they need for when they have a new baby. And we have the summer programs for the kids during the summer. And basically our core program is the New Neighbor program.
And do you know approximately how many volunteers you have, or how many families have signed up?
So we've served over 700 families.
Wow.
Yeah, and each family, it averages about 6. So they're large. Some families are very large. Some families could be 13 in a family. And so they're quite large. And so yeah, 700 families. Think about all the individuals that have been helped with that.
Yeah, that's a few thousand. I was trying to find like the latest statistics of how many people are coming to Virginia, and I only found like an old statistic of like 6,000 coming last year, but I know that we still have Afghans arriving every week.
Absolutely.
So I imagine that number is much higher now.
It's higher. I believe I've heard that there's going to be about at least another 6,000, 4,000 to 6,000 coming into the Virginia area. That's not just Afghans. I think that's in general immigrants. But the numbers are, they're still coming in. So I want to make sure that everybody knows that it hasn't stopped. We get one intake a day. We have tons of families that we haven't even been able to match to an American family to, because we just don't have enough volunteers. There are lots of families that require assistance, and they're coming in every single day. A lot of the families have been waiting in third-party countries, and so they've been waiting for the processing and their visas to get through, and then they're once that's done, then they're able to come to the U.S., and that's when it starts.
So it sounds like there's really a need that's surpassing the support network that's available to receive them. How can people get involved if they want to help? What are the greatest needs that you see right now that are not being fulfilled?
So there are a lot. There's a lot of obstacles that the families face, such as having holder jobs. We touched on that a little bit when I spoke about my father having to work as a dishwasher and having a job until, so those are some of the obstacles they're facing, as they are basically having to work for jobs that they don't, they're overqualified for, and they're not making ends meet with the families. Having those large families and not having enough income to, to feed them and to clothe them is an obstacle. So the things we've run into are, finding housing for them, having affordable housing, getting them groceries. There's always like a lag between the time you arrive until you're actually able to get some support from the government as far as SNAP or anything like that. So during that time, they don't have, they don't have enough food. So IROC will supply them with, some groceries. And they need clothing, they need essentials, they need furnishings. And so those are the things they don't really want to think about, because they have other things they have to think about. They have to think about, how am I going to get my kids enrolled in school, getting them uniforms, you know, how am I going to get a job, where am I going to get a job, how am I going to get to my job, you know, transportation. So the things that, you know, the public can get involved and are, you know, just stay engaged with local communities, local organizations, I should say, that are serving those populations. And, you know, we need volunteers. We really need volunteers to just, you know, deliver maybe a car seat to a family, you know, or take them a bag of groceries if they need, or take them to the doctor's office, things like that, or provide your talent, provide your expertise. If you are good at, you know, helping someone with resumes, we need that. We need someone to be able to look at these CVs that have come through. Every country has their own specificities, right? So making sure that they are aligned with what U.S. is looking for in the job market, and you know, getting them, you know, to having them get into a good job, whether it's entry level or what have you. So those are the things that we really lack, and those are the things that we need.
So it sounds like the things that the volunteers can help with that are tangible are some of the essentials, just figuring out how their life is going to go here, enrolling in school, getting clothing, getting food, and then getting onto the services that they qualify for. And then it sounds like there might be a need for a little bit more governmental support in terms of housing and getting people aligned with the proper jobs. I know that a lot of Afghans who are coming here are highly skilled.
Yes.
So what's keeping them out of the job market? We have about a minute left, but is it language, or is there a need for more English classes?
Definitely language is a huge part of it, but the ones that are overqualified know English, but I think it's just knowing the right person. You know, they have the skills. It shows that, but the thing is that a lot of the companies and a lot of the, I guess, the U.S. market is looking for some, you know, U.S. U.S. experience, and they lack that. That's what they don't have.
So it sounds like, you know, maybe if they learn to market themselves, or they have some support to align their skills with their jobs, they'll be able to transition over to those roles. And thank you so much for being here. I really enjoyed hearing your family story. To our audience, stick around, we have another guest after the break.
Every day across America, excess food is gathered by a network of good people at local food banks, giving hope to millions of children who struggle with hunger. They've earned their wings, and you can too. Together, we can solve child hunger. Support Feeding America and your local food bank at feedingamerica.org.
Hi, I'm Josh Temple. You might have seen me on TV where I help folks turn their houses into dream homes. But forget construction. Parenting is the toughest job there is. So when you need help or advice, turn to the parenting experts at Boys Town.
I was afraid of that.
Well, guess it's time to get you fixed.
Your pets will start fooling around sooner than you think.
Go on, get out of here!
Accidental litters lead to millions killed in shelters each year. Help prevent more. Fix at month 4.
Food. It nourishes, brings us together, and adds flavor to life. That's why it's important to wash hands, surfaces, and fresh produce. Keep raw meat, poultry, and seafood separate from ready-to-eat foods like fruits and vegetables. And cook to proper temperatures using a food thermometer. Enjoy, and refrigerate leftovers within 2 hours. For more tips on safely preparing foods, visit homefoodsafety.org.
to the Inside Scoop. Here again, your host.
Welcome back to Inside Scoop. I'm your host this week, Mary Barthelson. We are joined by Rohin who arrived as part of the evacuation of Afghanistan in 2021. Rohin, thank you for joining us. Can you share a little bit about yourself and introduce yourself to our audience?
Yes, thank you so much, Mary, for giving me this opportunity. And yes, my name is Rohin and I'm an Afghan veteran who served alongside the U.S. Army, Department of State, and Department of Defense in Kabul, Afghanistan, in the capacity of an interpreter, cultural advisor, and attack support. It's really young when I started this. Working with the U.S. Army, and the reason was because I was helping my dad, who was working with the U.S. Army and Department of State and Department of Defense. And one day my dad invited his supervisor over and told him about how much I helped my dad digitalize some of the study material that they were working on for the soldiers. And my dad's supervisor was really impressed by my work, and he was like, "You want to get paid for what you're doing?" So at a very young age, like I was around like 15 or 16 years old when I started working with them, and yes, really privileged and really happy and about my work and my service, and me and my family take a huge pride in that. And but unfortunately, due to the situation, due to the security concerns and whatnot, and our direct service to the U.S. Government, our life was not very safe, and there were like multiple threats of verbal threats, like in different form. Like we received different forms of threat, and there was also like an attempt to kidnap me. And that's when my parents decided that Kabul is not safe anymore for me because of our service. And then they decided to send me to India. And even though back then working remote was not a thing, but I was still working in translating and just preparing some study material for the Afghan soldier and U.S. soldiers in Afghanistan. I was sending it over to them, and yeah, I wanted to start my education, and with the help of my fellow U.S. Army that I was working with, and my supervisor. I learned about different programs here in the U.S. and I applied for some universities here. Then I came here for my higher education and got my bachelor's degree from James Madison University. But I was still not kind of like very satisfied, and really not in peace, because my family, my immediate family, my parents and my siblings were still back home. So I decided to go back and bring them to safety.
So what year was that? So when was the year that you arrived?
I arrived in 2015.
2015,
yeah.
And then you were here for school.
Yes. Then I went back in around 2020.
In 2020.
Yeah.
And so on the news, at least in America, it felt like the fall of Kabul was very sudden. Maybe we were distracted with COVID and focused internally, but for us it seemed like it happened all of a sudden. But according to the White House report on the fall of Kabul, it stated that the Taliban were in the strongest position since 2001 and they controlled half the country. So that does not sound like it happened overnight, and it seems like you and possibly others saw the writing on the walls, and you went back to get your family. So what was going on leading up to the fall of Kabul that we missed, those of us who were not paying attention?
Honestly, like even when I left before all this, even back in 2012 and 13, It was people were not very like the security situation, and it was not stable. There was always like a suicide bombing, and they were like people were not very like living in safety. But like as it was getting closer to there were like rumors that the U.S. Troops would withdraw, and people knew for some reason that it's gonna come, and we even like I started my parents' paperwork back in 2016, and it took just long for them to get approved and come here. Internally, Taliban had control over so many provinces, and they had all the equipments, and they were getting trained, and they were for some reason, maybe the world didn't see it. It just happened for the world. It happened overnight. But I think the Afghans, we had some instinct, and we knew that it will come, because they had control over so many major cities, and they had and traveling within Afghanistan was not very safe, because they had control over, and they had over the transportation and whatnot. So even going there to those cities was not safe. So I think it did happen overnight, but there were like a lot history in it that took years.
So I know that we had at one point hundreds of thousands of troops there, and we whittled that down to just a few thousand. And don't quote me on the year. I think it was 2014, but I could be wrong.
No, you're right.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay, good. So I remember that correctly. And was that around the time where the Taliban started taking more control of things? How do you think the Taliban were able to see this resurgence in their power and take more territories?
Yes, so I think it was, you're right, around 2014 was when there were talk of U.S. reducing the number of its troops in Afghanistan, and eventually leave the country. So that was an opportunity for them to kind of like, as U.S. Troops were handing over some cities and provinces to Afghan National Army. They saw that as an opportunity to kind of take over those cities and kind of fight. That's when it kind of increased. And yes, since 2014, it just like it was they took over a lot of
yeah,
exactly.
I know the U.S. is the strongest military in the world, but it sounds like the Afghan army, who we trained and we provided them with some support, that they were overwhelmed. Who was backing the Taliban? That's a tough question. If it's a hard question, just say it's a hard question.
I can't say who was backing up Afghanistan. Sorry, Taliban. But within it's true that there were over 100,000 of Afghan army, and they were trained and they were equipped. But this is also true that we were lacking leadership. The leaders were not doing their job. Things were very unplanned, and U.S. Troops withdrawal and the fall of Kabul was I think, personally, I think it was due to the lack of leadership and the chaos, the chaotic withdrawal. It was not very well planned. If it was well planned and it was, if we had like good leaders within Afghanistan, I think this would have been prevented, or at least it wouldn't have happened this way.
Yeah, so it sounds like the Taliban taking control of the country was enabled from, as you said, the lack of leadership. And I know that a lot of Afghans fought and died fighting the Taliban. I think in the last decade, like 70,000 was the number I saw. But so it was a lot of Afghans who they put their life on the line for their country, but from the top down, there wasn't enough there to sustain the country. And what would have happened if you had stayed in the country as someone who had worked with the U.S.?
I think it's very obvious because people who stayed, they're not with us anymore. And some of my very close friends, or even like within our extended families, I'm fortunate enough and very lucky that my immediate family is safe here right now, but people who worked and who were interpreters like me and my father, they're not among us anymore, and they have been executed, or they have like their family were torn apart, or they're still in some sort of like kind of like they're arrested, and their family don't know where they are and when they will be reuniting with their family. So I think I would have been one of them.
So it's safe to say that it's important for the U.S. to honor our commitment and our allies and continue to support the resettlement of SIV holders in the U.S.?
100%. As much as I'm grateful and very thankful for the help and the assistance of my fellow co-workers during the evacuation, but I feel like right now I feel I'm in a limbo because I don't have I've applied for my green card like so long ago, and still I don't have any decision or answer. So like me, there are like about 80,000 of us right now living in a limbo and don't know what to do or what's it to come, or like if they have to like go back and just face Taliban or whatnot. So yeah, I feel like U.S. could help expedite this whole process and bring us like a sense of calmness and peace.
We're about to go to break, but I want to talk a little bit more about that when we get back. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back after a short break for more discussion with Rohin.
Caitlin, be serious. No, take the oath. Come on. I'm totally taking this seriously. Okay, I'm ready. You may begin. I pledge that I will never meet in person with anyone I first met online without checking with my parent or guardian. And furthermore, if my parent or guardian agrees to the meeting, it will be in a public place and my parent or guardian must come along. Do you pinky swear? I do.
When you teach your kids about internet safety, they'll pass it on. For more information, go to cableclicksmart.org.
Dare to load their minds. Dare to explore. Dare to STEM. Learn more at She Can STEM.
You're not the kind of guy that makes the girls all sigh.
2 for $3.
They never turn their heads and look when you walk by. 'Cause it's the little things.
Oh, thank you.
You're welcome. Helping.
What a nice young man.
Pass it on.
My goodness.
A message from the Foundation for a Better Life.
I better get out of here. Ooh.
Get it.
Get it.
Get it.
Give your town a reason to celebrate, because every Goodwill item you bring home brings job training and more to your community. Goodwill. Bring good home.
we're back to the Inside Scoop. Here again, your host.
Welcome back. I'm your host this week, Mary Barthelson. We're continuing our discussion tonight with Rohin about the resettlement of Afghan refugees in the U.S. Before the break, we were talking a little bit about the legal limbo that a lot of Afghans have found themselves in the U.S. now. Can you talk a little bit about that? I know you arrived for school, so even though you worked with the Army, you don't have your SIV yet. So what's your legal status currently?
Yes, I'm considered as the applicant of like a special immigrant visa right now. I don't have my green card as of right now. I have provided all sort of information that the USCIS has asked me for, and went through the interview and whatnot. Still, the wait and the backlog is just crazy, and I still don't have my green card, and really don't know when will I get it. But just hoping for the immigration system to be considerate of its allies and the people who put their lives in risk, in danger, to just support and be a true ally for the country.
So you really don't have any insight into how long it's going to take for you to get your SIV?
Unfortunately, I don't. Initially, the whole process was supposed to take not more than 6 months. That's what the USCIS, or at least the Department of Homeland Security is stating. But
when was that estimate given? Was that before 2001 or 2021, or was that after?
This was recently, because they wanted to expedite the whole or streamline the process for Afghan evacuees. Unfortunately, it's been over 2 years now that I'm one of them, and I haven't received my green card yet.
And now that we're coming up on the 2-year mark, I know that a lot of Afghans are here as humanitarian parolees. So that was kind of like a blanket catch-all for all the Afghans who came who might not have been in process for an SIV, or they might have come for a variety of different reasons, and they're having to go through the whole process of reapplying for that now. Re-paroling, filing more paperwork to get a new work visa so that they can keep working. So it seems like now the backlog is going to be expanded again, even more.
Exactly. And I feel like these are all temporary fixes, which is not leading to any like it's still uncertain. Like after, I'm not sure, but I believe it's again 2 years of having a legal status in the U.S. So again, if for long term, if they're trying to stay here and obtain a green card, then USCIS has to do the whole process again. So it is temporary fix as well as a lot of work. So I know there's so many advocacies going on for the Afghan Adjustment Act, and that is one way to address this issue, I believe. And
so the Afghan Adjustment Act, that is a bill that is in Congress now, that I know that a lot of the resettlement groups are supporting, that's supposed to assist in this whole process for all of our Afghan allies, although I don't remember the details off the top of my head. I know that that's like the priority one for everyone who's supporting Afghans to try to get that passed.
Exactly. They were pushing for it last year. Unfortunately, it didn't pass. So right now, there's so much advocacy, and there's so many organization, non-profit organization that I've volunteered with, some are working on it, but I was hopeful before this re-parole situation for the U.S. government to approve or pass that bill, but unfortunately they come up with a temporary solution of re-paroling the parolees. Really can't say with any certainty that it will pass or not.
So for citizens like myself, I have not gone through the immigration process. I don't really know what that entails or what sort of restrictions that puts on someone's life. So can you talk about being in limbo? What does that mean for your life? Does it affect your work situation? Are you allowed to travel? Does it prevent you from being able to see some of your family?
No, actually, it's a kind of like, if you're out, there's no guarantee that you will be coming back. Same was the situation when I left to bring my family to safety.
So if you leave the U.S., you might not be able to come back.
Not with the status that I have right now. Not until I have green card. There's definitely travel restriction. You can travel within the U.S., but not like if once you leave the U.S. or once I leave the U.S. There's no guarantee, or unless I have applied for something new that will let me enter, or if I have applied for a travel document, that would take like another 14-15 months. And there's also work restriction. The work authorization that I have received, that's also temporary. So I have to keep on renewing that until I get my green card. Same goes for all the other Afghans. If you don't have your work authorization, you can't apply for driving license, or that's a proof that you're staying in the U.S. legally. So there's a lot of other restriction with respect to even housing. Some of the these rental agencies and apartments, they ask you to provide some sort of like documentation of your legal status, and most of them, they don't know even what is work permit or work authorization, or like some of them, they don't even know what's a green card. So there's a lot of restriction, and there's a lot of work behind the scene that all these Afghans and I have been through, and I've gone through it during the whole resettlement process, and it's tough and challenging. And I was lucky that I knew some, just like having experience here before. I knew a little bit about the system and about the whole process and whatnot, but people who don't know anything, and they came up with just like a backpack, and they have like a language barrier. It's very hard.
So for those individuals, I would imagine that they're very dependent on their resettlement agency and organizations out there that are designed to help them. So are there any services in particular that you think are important for the government to support, like local governments, aside from the Afghan Adjustment Act in Congress? Do you think that it's like the essential benefits of like food stamps, or is it English classes, or legal services?
Just going through the whole resettlement process, it was chaotic, because I do understand that some of these resettlement agencies were also very overwhelmed. It was unprecedented, and it was like it never happened before, so they never had experience working with such a large group of number of people. So they were also very overwhelmed, very understaffed, and very not sure, but like they were not well funded. Well, that's what they were like. When I was talking with some of the caseworkers, that's what they were telling me. So I feel like, and also within DMV area, there were just few number of resettlement agency, and I feel like if they would expand the number of resettlement agency and hire people that know that what they're doing, I think that would definitely help a little bit these Afghans with their at least housing and some of the other basic needs, food stamp and like jobs and whatnot. So I feel like if they would expand it or like have few more resettlement agency in the area, that would be really helpful.
So we have like about 2 minutes left, and so I want to ask what your impression has been of resettling in the U.S. or your experience. Have you found Americans to be welcoming? I'm sure that this whole process has been a headache, but have people been supportive?
Yes, and I am truly grateful for all my fellow Americans and fellow co-workers that I worked long time ago, and they have been really supportive, very welcoming, and they did whatever to make this transition for us seamless. Despite having all the other challenges, me and my family, we are very grateful for the opportunity, for the new life, and for the some of the people that have supported us in the beginning. They still continue to help us with some of the needs that we have, but I think like everything comes with pros and cons, but like there's some challenges that we are working through it. But yeah, very well. Me and my family, we felt really welcomed and really supportive.
Well, I'm glad that you've had that experience. I know that going through all of this, coming to a new country, it's a lot of work, and I hope that everyone out there will support IROC. Thank you for being here and talking with us. That's all we have tonight, and have a wonderful evening.